Hey friends, appreciate giving me a little time here. I think it's important for me as your elected representative, talk real quick to you about what's going on with the budget right now. The budget process is starting in Washington, D.C. They're soliciting input from members, and I want you to know what your member is talking about to create jobs and get our nation on a sounder fiscal footing. I think it's really, really important for job creation. That companies want to invest in this country and not take their jobs overseas. You know, China, Brazil, they should be investing here in America. To that end, I believe very, very strongly that we need to get our fiscal house in order so that companies will invest here and feel confident about the full faith and credit of this country. That means making some serious decisions about what we do on our domestic budget, our defense budget, our entitlement programs, and revenues. As you know, hopefully by now, many of my town halls I talk about how our revenues are an all-time low, lowest they've been since almost World War II. We need to actually make some investments in infrastructure, jobs, frankly, our forests and rural areas. And you can't do that when your historical revenues are an all-time low. 14% of what we're spending as a percentage of our budget. That's low. It used to be up in the 20% range. Similarly, our spending's at an all-time high. We're now at 25%, and our spending's been down in the 20-21% range. So we can't afford to do that, folks. We just can't afford to do that. We're basically mortgaging our children's future. They should have the opportunity to be looking at a life that's as good or better than the ones we're having here right now in the greatest country on earth. The Budget Control Act from last August set some good benchmarks for us to get started on this discussion. We actually talked about reducing our debt deficit by almost $1 trillion in a thoughtful way, you know, looking at both domestic and defense programs, a very thoughtful procedure. I thought it was a good compromise. Neither the far left or far right were satisfied, but it was a good compromise. We did have a super committee that was supposed to come up with additional reductions, hopefully in that another $1 trillion range. They failed. Unfortunately, partisanship reared its ugly head one more time here in Congress. Partisans, well-meaning folks, but partisans were put on that committee and they just couldn't agree. As a result, we now have a sequestration, fancy word that means they're going to be automatic across-the-board cuts, not necessarily intelligently done, picking thoughtful winners and losers here, but actually just making across-the-board cuts, over half of which come in the Department of Defense. And while some of us may think that's great stuff, there's a great many Oregonians and a great many Americans that are worried about that. Also means much deeper cuts in some of our education, healthcare, natural resource, and economic development programs. There's a smarter way to go about this, and there's a group of us on this Go Big coalition here in Washington, D.C. that's trying to pick up where the super committee failed, do a more thoughtful reduction in force, and actually begin to address the revenue and the entitlement programs. Say what you will, Medicare is growing exponentially. And it's not because of evil doings by President Bush or President Obama. It's just basic math. Basic math meaning that there's a lot more people retiring right now. The baby boomers are upon us and wanting Medicare assistance. There's also less people paying into the system right now. As we speak, there's like 3 workers for every beneficiary. Used to be 16 workers for every beneficiary. And frankly, healthcare has gotten better and more expensive as a result of getting better. So we've got a perfect storm here that's creating a huge, huge burden in our spending. And if you look at the charts, it's clear it's not our domestic or defense spending that's breaking the bank right now. They can and should be reduced, but it's really the Medicare spending that is really getting to the point. We now have $8,000, over $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America in healthcare spending. And we're not necessarily getting better healthcare. That's why some of these reforms are so important. So I'm going to be pushing that as a way to get our debt deficit under control. I've talked to a lot of major CEOs. They're interested in tax reform as a way to get there. We don't beat up on millionaires. We make sure everyone pays their fair share. We can reduce the rates for everybody by getting rid of all the tax breaks in this code, or almost all, and really get it to where we're paying our fair share. Middle-class America will no longer be bearing the burden. Everyone will pay their fair share. I'm also working on a couple of ideas, I think, in the transportation arena. Infrastructure investment, as every businessman and woman knows out there, is critical to getting our goods to market, making sure we're competitive against these newly emerging economies that are just now developing state-of-the-art, highway, port, rail, and airport systems. We need to keep pace with that. So infrastructure investment has to occur. Very tough here. There are some people in Washington, D.C. that don't understand long-term capital investment is different than operational dollars. And I'm working bipartisanly with Greg Walden and Peter DeFazio on a bill to make sure that rural America also has an opportunity to be successful here as this economy slowly begins to recover. And recovering it is. But we got to make sure rural America enjoys that opportunity. So we're trying to finally end the timber wars, divide up Oregon's O&C lands into two good equal parcels, one set aside for old growth, the other side set aside for revenue generation and thoughtful, sustainable logging on our public lands, to make sure our counties don't go bankrupt. To make sure our counties don't go bankrupt, to make sure that we get back to creating jobs right here in Oregon across the board. So there's some great initiatives out there. I know you hear about all the doom and gloom and all the partisan warfare, and to be sure, it's not a pretty environment these days. But I take solace that our founding fathers also had a lot of the same issues. And initiatives like the Go Big, like working on transportation, like working on our federal forest lands, are areas where we can agree on. And some of us are trying to move that ball down the field. So stay in touch with us, and we'll try and give you more updates as things go on. Thanks so much.